Be they stalwart protectors clad in plate, powerful druids shapeshifted into towering bears, elusive monks, or mighty demon hunters, the tank is the character that protects their friends. But how do you tank? Well, let me show you. Hello there and welcome to the Tanking Guide. Over this series of videos we'll discuss everything you need to know to become a master tank. In the last lesson we learned all about control, how wrangling your enemies, keeping them close together, facing them away from the group, and away from other enemies not involved in the fight is a great idea. And we discussed tricks we can use to control the group we're working with, and to control our own character and use the environment to our advantage. We've talked a lot about general tanking concepts, about things that we can do regardless of the class we're playing. Things like understanding how threat works, how to survive, and how we can control situations. But it's also important that we understand how the class we're playing actually, works. Because using abilities in the right order and prioritizing certain spells over others is what's known as a rotation. And in this video we're going to examine what the best rotations for each tanking class are, so that we can deal as much damage as we can while maintaining survivability and control, all the while being beaten on by our foes. It's important to note that we'll only be going over the basic rotation for each class as we have 5 to go through, and you could easily turn each one of these rotations into an hour-long conversation about how the intricate mechanics work. This is going to be more general. We won't be discussing advanced concepts or about how gear affects the way you play, just the kind of core concepts for each class. Of course, if you're watching in an expansion that isn't Warlords of Draenor, some of this information may be outdated. Now, let's get started. The Blood Death Knight revolves around using Death Strike as much as possible. This heals you and provides a damage absorption shield. You have 2 resources, runes and runic power. Using abilities that cost runes generates runic power, which you can then use on other abilities. You have 4 types of runes: Blood, Frost, Unholy, and Death runes. Death runes temporarily replace other runes and can count as any kind of rune. First of all, you want your diseases to be on the enemy or enemies as quickly as possible, and you want to maintain those diseases at all times. They are called Blood Plague and Frost Fever, and they'll last for 30 seconds. If you're watching this in Legion, you'll only have Blood Plague to worry about, but the goal here is to always have diseases up. When you begin fights, apply them with your Outbreak ability. If you don't yet have Outbreak available because you're lower level, apply your diseases with Icy Touch and Plague Strike. If you have Outbreak available, you'll probably want to glyph it with Glyph of Outbreak. You want to refresh your diseases with your Blood Boil ability. You'll want to use Death and Decay, or, if you have talented into it, Defile on cooldown. You can see that we're using our Blood runes on Blood Boil, and spending 1 Unholy rune every now and then on Death and Decay, or Defile. Now Death Strike costs 1 Frost rune and 1 Unholy rune, so you want to spend your Frost, Unholy, and Death runes on Death Strike. When they're regenerating, use your Blood runes on Blood Boil. Don't use Death runes on Blood Boil, or you'll be wasting potential Death Strikes. Sounds fairly complicated, but in practice, you can kind of get into the flow of it. Now, as you do this, you'll be generating runic power. You'll want to spend your runic power on Death Coil on your enemy. If Crimson Scourge ever activates, which makes your next Death and Decay or Blood Boil free, use it on a really quick Blood Boil. When an enemy is low on health, use Soul Reaper on them as much as you can. Finally, if you've chosen Blood Tap as a talent, you'll never want to reach 12 stacks. You can reach 10 charges, activate it twice, and then Death Strike repeatedly to survive nasty situations. Since it only activates fully depleted runes, you'll need to have used them up already. It refreshes your runes, it doesn't make them regenerate faster. That's how you generate threat and deal damage as a Death Knight. Now, a quick mention of your cooldowns. Use Rune Tap as much as you can whenever you're fighting more than one enemy or that one enemy is dangerous. Never let this spell sit on 2 charges unpressed. Use Anti-Magic Shell whenever you see spells flying your way or if there are area of effect spells going on. Watch out for the bonus runic power it generates for you. Use Icebound Fortitude as your big cooldown. Use it when you're really in danger or you know you're going to be taking tons of damage, like if you see lots of enemies running at you. This is your big cooldown. Don't be afraid to use it. Use Dancing Rune Weapon when fighting lots of enemies, or enemies that attack quickly. It's not helpful against spells, only melee attacks. Using it on cooldown is generally a good idea. Use Army of the Dead for big boss fights or huge amounts of enemies. They'll taunt enemies for you, and since they're disposable, they'll keep the enemy busy for a few moments, assuming that they can be taunted by non-player characters. Raid bosses cannot be taunted like this. Use Bone Shield before a fight begins to get its cooldown rolling before you enter a fight. Use it on cooldown or when you know you're going to be taking a big spurt of damage. Use Vampiric Blood right before you Death Strike. This will help you heal yourself up and give you a bigger shield. You can use Vampiric Blood and then Death Strike a whole bunch of times, and you've got a big shield and lots of healing. Finally, use Empower Rune Weapon when you've used up all of your runes and runic power, to basically reset everything and get going once more. It has a long cooldown, so save it for emergency situations. Use Death Grip and Dark Command to taunt your foes. Remember that Death Grip yanks them to you. The Guardian Druid's rotation revolves around generating and spending Rage. Savage Defense is your main active mitigation, and it costs 60 Rage, has 2 charges, and a 12-second recharge time. Frenzied Rejuvenation is your other means of survival. It has no cooldown, costs up to 60 Rage, and heals you. So you want to focus on generating as much Rage as possible. Focus on keeping Mangle on cooldown to generate Rage and deal damage. Use Lacerate 3 times to get a stack of 3 on your enemy. Lacerate has a chance to reset Mangle's cooldown, so watch out for that happening. Once you have a stack of 3, consume them with your level 100 talent, Pulverize. Refresh Lacerate up to 3 stacks and reapply Pulverize before the buff falls off of you. Apply and maintain the Thrash Bleed effect. Use Maul if you are ever under the effect of Tooth and Claw, which causes your next Maul to reduce the damage the enemy does to you. Also consider using Maul if you're close to maximum rage, so you don't waste any. That's your basic rotation. When fighting multiple enemies, use Thrash a little more often to generate threat, but stick to the current priority list as well. Use Savage Defense before you start taking damage, but just remember that it only helps with melee attackers. Use Frenzied Regeneration after you take damage to help heal it up. Savage Defense is a proactive mitigation spell, and Frenzied Regeneration is a reactive mitigation spell. Your big cooldowns are Survival Instincts and Bark Skin. Use Bark Skin regularly, since it only has a 60-second cooldown. It's great to smoothen out damage. Survival Instincts is even stronger, so use it in emergencies, like when you get swamped by enemies or a huge spell or enemy is about to hit you. Finally, you have Berserk, which makes Mangle hit multiple enemies and have no cooldown. This is mostly for dealing damage and generating threat, so use it near the start of a fight to get that initial aggro. Use Growl to taunt enemies and Fairy Fire to generate threat from afar. The Brewmaster Monk's rotation is about using their energy bar to generate chi, and then spending their chi on powerful abilities. They have a lot of ways to avoid damage, and a lot of passive mitigation, making it quite difficult to juggle everything. But when played well, they are very difficult to kill. You have 4 different ways of mitigating damage. Stagger is your baseline mechanic, which causes some of the damage you take to be stored in a debuff on you, and you will slowly take that damage over time. You can use Purifying Brew to purify your stagger and remove the incoming damage. Elusive Brew is your second mitigation. It causes auto-attack critical strikes to generate 1 charge of brew, stacking up to 15. When used, you gain an increased 45% dodge chance, lasting 1 second per charge of brew consumed. Your third is Guard. This is a damage absorption shield that costs 2 chi and, once you reach high level, has 2 charges and a 30-second cooldown. It also increases the healing you do to yourself while it's active. Finally, you have Shuffle. This is a buff placed on you when you use Blackout Kick, which is an offensive spell that costs 2 chi. Shuffle increases your parry chance and lasts 6 seconds. That's a lot of stuff. Let's break that down. So, you'll be using 3 spells to spend energy and generate chi. Keg Smash, Jab, and Expel Harm. Keg Smash deals area of effect damage and generates 2 chi, with an 8-second cooldown and a cost of 40 energy. Jab deals single target damage and generates 1 chi, with no cooldown and a cost of 40 energy. Expel Harm heals you and deals damage to a nearby enemy based upon how much healing you did. It generates 1 chi, has a 15-second cooldown, and costs 40 energy, and, if you're low on health, resets its own cooldown. You'll want to use Keg Smash on cooldown to deal damage and generate chi, Expel Harm on cooldown, but only if you're not at full health, and Jab when you're at or above 80 energy, to prevent you from maxing out. If you're against multiple enemies, use Spinning Crane Kick and Keg Smash to deal damage and generate chi. You're going to want to spend chi on guard to raise your absorption shield and survive. When guard isn't available, or you're saving it for a burst of damage, spend your chi on blackout kick to deal damage and keep shuffle up. Alright, now for survival. You need to keep an eye on elusive brew stacks, and your stagger bar, and the cooldown of guard, and the shuffle bar. The best way to survive as a brewmaster is to combine these mitigation methods. Elusive brew and shuffle work really well together. Guard is a really strong shield that works really well in combination with any of the others. You also have cooldowns like fortifying brew, which increases your maximum health, reduces the damage you take, and makes you stagger more damage. And you also have Zen meditation, which reduces damage taken by 90%, but stops if you're hit by an attack. This is great to use against spellcasters because spells don't technically count as attacks. Try to keep this overall idea in mind. Maintain your mitigation, no matter what it is. Elusive brew stacks should never reach 15 because you'll waste them then. Guard should never have both charges available for a long time. Shuffle should be maintained at almost all times, and you should use purifying brew to purify a dangerous stagger bar. It's complex, yes, but there's a flow to it that you can learn by practicing it. Spend lots of time on training dummies so that you can kind of learn how it all works and you can get past that initial difficulty curve. Because once you get past that, there's an awful lot the monk can do. Ever since it was introduced, it's pretty much universally been agreed that a bad monk, a bad brewmaster, can take a lot of damage and be extremely squishy, but a brewmaster that is really, really skilled and that knows how all of their abilities work and uses them correctly is incredibly survivable and really difficult to kill. Use Provoke to taunt your enemies and Dizzying Haze to aggro enemies from afar. The Protection Paladin's rotation is all about holy power. You'll be generating it with Crusader Strike, which has a 4.5 second cooldown, Hammer of the Righteous, which also has a 4.5 second cooldown, Judgment, which has a 6 second cooldown, and sometimes with other spells like Avenger's Shield, 15 second cooldown and can be reset, and Holy Wrath, a 15 second cooldown as well. You'll be spending your holy power on two main spells, Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glory. Shield of the Righteous costs 3 holy power and deals damage to a single enemy. For 3 seconds afterwards, you take reduced physical damage. Additionally, it increases the power of your next Word of Glory by 8%, stacking up to 5 times. It has a 1.5 second cooldown. Word of Glory is an instant heal that consumes 1 to 3 holy power, increasing in power depending upon how much holy power it consumes. It has no cooldown. Okay, so your basic rotation is to use your holy power generators as often as possible, and spend that holy power on Shield of the Righteous or Word of Glory. You'll want to maintain a high uptime on Shield of the Righteous. This just means that you want the buff to be active for as long as possible. Just like with the Druid, Shield of the Righteous is proactive mitigation, and Word of Glory is reactive mitigation. In practice, your rotation will look something like this. Use Crusader Strike on cooldown. Use Judgment on cooldown as well. There will be gaps in your rotation. You're going to want to fill it with either Execution Sentence, Light's Hammer, Holy Prism. Now these 3 spells are all part of the same tier of talents, so you'll be using one of those 3 spells. Then, Holy Wrath, if you don't have it talented, Hammer of Wrath, if the enemy's low, or Consecration, in that order of priority. Basically, you want your holy power generators to be used as much as possible. Avenger's Shield has a chance to be reset by Grand Crusader. When it lights up, it will generate holy power when you next use it, so throw it out as soon as possible. If you've taken the Sanctified Wrath talent, you'll want to use Holy Wrath on cooldown as well, to generate more holy power. Against multiple enemies, replace Crusader Strike with Hammer of the Righteous, and use Consecration as much as you can as well. There are a lot of ways that talents change this rotation, but that's the very basics. Generate and spend holy power as much as you can. Spend your holy power on Shield of the Righteous, and when you have a 5 stack of Bastion of Glory, spend it on a Word of Glory when you're low on health. The faster you can do this, the faster that you can spend and generate holy power, the more difficult to kill you'll be. This again takes a lot of practice. The Paladin has always been about lots of shiny buttons. There's a priority there, and that changes depending upon what's on cooldown and what talents you have taken. Remember, you can have up to 5 holy power, so you can pool it at times if you need to. Your cooldowns are Guardian of Ancient Kings, which is a 50% damage reduction, Ardent Defender, which is a 20% damage reduction that will save you from death once, Divine Protection, which is either a 40% magic damage reduction or a 20% magic and 20% physical damage reduction if you glyph it, Lay on Hands, which heals you to full health, and Divine Shield, which makes you immune to all damage, but makes you lose threat during its duration. If you use Divine Shield, enemies that are attacking you will stop attacking you and go for other people. This is a huge loss of control, so be careful. You'll want to use Divine Protection to fill in moments where you don't have Shield of the Righteous active. Divine Protection has a low cooldown, so use it as much as you can. The other cooldowns should be used as necessary in emergency situations, or when you're afraid for your life. Lay on Hands is the most powerful with a huge cooldown. If you're low on health and you lay on hands, bang, you're up to full health, you're safe for the time being. Use it in emergencies. Guardian of Ancient Kings is the next really powerful one. Use it when you're taking loads of damage. Divine Shield is tricky to use correctly, but talented players can use a cancel aura macro to activate it and cancel it immediately, becoming immune to deadly attacks. A cancel aura macro is basically a macro that you create that tells the game to cast the spell, put Divine Shield on you, and then, if you press it again, makes you remove the shield, so you don't lose threat. So you can tap it twice in a row to basically make yourself immune or to dispel certain nasty debuffs on yourself. This is an advanced concept, and be very careful about how you use it. Finally, Ardent Defender is one of those, oh crap, I'm on really low health, I might die kind of cooldowns. So make sure you use it in those kind of emergencies where you know you're in danger. Finally, you'll want to use Reckoning to taunt enemies and Avenger's Shield to generate threat from afar. The Warrior is all about generating and spending rage, and they have two main forms of mitigation. Shield Block, which increases their block chance to 100%, and Shield Barrier, which is a damage absorption shield. Shield Block costs 60 rage, and Shield Barrier costs between 20 and 60, consuming extra rage up to that cap of 60 to make the shield stronger. So your goal is to generate loads of rage. You generate rage with Shield Slam, which has a 6-second cooldown, and Revenge, which has a 9-second cooldown and can be reset if you dodge or parry an attack. And you also slowly generate rage while in combat. Your basic rotation is as such. Use Revenge and Shield Slam on cooldown to generate rage. Spend that rage on Shield Block if fighting melee enemies, or on Shield Barrier if you're fighting ranged or magical enemies. That's the general idea, and each situation requires you to think about how you're taking damage so that you can mitigate it correctly. There's a lot of discussion and math behind whether Shield Block or Shield Barrier is better. In reality and in practice, when you're out there in the big wide world fighting enemies, it's a judgment call. Since Shield Block has a 12-second recharge and 2 charges, there will be situations where everything is on cooldown. In these situations, you'll want to use Thunderclap to deal area of effect damage, then repeatedly use Devastate until your rage generators are available again. If you find yourself on a lot of rage and you're worried that you'll reach the cap and waste more rage, use a Heroic Strike to dump some of that rage. That's your basic rotation. Your cooldowns are Shield Wall, which reduces all damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds, Last Stand, which increases your health by 30% for 15 seconds, Demoralizing Shout, which reduces the damage enemies deal to you by 20% for 8 seconds, and Spell Reflection, which reflects a single target spell back to the caster. Shield Wall is your great all-purpose cooldown. It helps in any situation where you're taking lots of damage. Last Stand is your oh crap button, and you can use it in situations when you're low on health to survive chunks of damage. You get a big bonus to health immediately as soon as you press the button, so it's a very reactive cooldown in that regard. Demoralizing Shout grows stronger the more enemies are near you, so if you can use it against loads of enemies, it will work really well. Finally, Spell Reflection is awkward, but if you ever see an enemy casting a spell directly at you, try to reflect it. This won't always work, and a lot of raid boss abilities cannot be reflected, but try it out and see if it'll work. Sometimes you might be surprised. You'll want to use Taunt to taunt your enemies, and Heroic Throw to attack from afar. That will conclude this lesson about rotations. We learned how each class works and how their resources and spells help them deal and mitigate damage, and even heal it up in some cases. Remember that this isn't a full guide to your class. Each class can go into much more detail than what we've discussed today. This is just a primer to get you started. Naturally, if you're watching this video during an expansion that isn't Warlords of Draenor, the classes will likely have changed a lot, so the information here may not be entirely accurate. The best source of information here is other players. Look up guides, talk to other players that play the class, and learn from them. Always want to learn. That's the best bit of advice I can give you when it comes to this kind of thing. Always want to learn. In our next lesson, we'll discuss the big important term that a lot of advanced players like to throw around, situational awareness. We'll discuss how you can start thinking ahead to become an even better tank, and what tools you have available to you to become a master of situational awareness. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.